Most of the Yugoslav community in Melbourne lives in the suburb of Footscray. It's here that the Ustaše are alleged to have their headquarters. Almost daily, there are said to be bashings and violence among Yugoslavs. A magazine called Ustaše sells at local coffee bars and soccer grounds. The magazine, printed in Canada and carrying the dates 1941-1971, supposedly celebrates 30 years of the movement. In the past 2 months, Melbourne University lecturer Dr. Elkner has uncovered strong evidence about the terrorist movement.
Well, there's a lot of evidence which comes mainly from the Serbo-Croatian press, from their own press that they publish here. They use all the symbols of the Ustaše, for example. They have the big U. They have this Czech symbol, which very often they use which was an Ustaše symbol in the war. They have references to members of their organisation given certain ranks in the Ustaše army, as such as Satnik, which is a captain. Other people are majors, and these are people who are Australian citizens who are referred to by their rank as members of the Ustaše. It's fairly well known by people who go to the soccer that one of the famous chants that goes up in the Croatian matches is 1, 2, 3, Ustaša we. There's also evidence from their own press. You find them linking up with Spain, for example, in one of their journals called Obrana, which mentions the existence in Australia of various people who were in the Ustaše during the war and who are still given the title that they had during the war as members of the Ustaše.
Do you think that the Ustaše are behind these bombings or members of the Croatian liberation movement?
Yes, I think the argument about whether or not the Ustaše exists is slightly a red herring. I think it's important that we get clearly in mind that there is a Croatian liberation movement which is certainly behind much of not only the bombings but the intimidations, the bashings, the threats that go on pretty well daily in Melbourne. We're quite certain there are at least 2 cases a day are reported by people who are very often frightened to give their names because of the threats of reprisals. We do know of one woman, for example, who runs a beauty shop in Footscray, who's now been threatened, I think, about 5 times in the last 2 months because she calls herself a Yugoslav. She refuses to call herself Croatian. Just recently in the courts, a man was convicted for assault on a Yugoslav migrant who was standing on a street corner. A man approached him and said to him in Serbo-Croat, "What are you?" The man replied, "I'm a Yugoslav." He was then told, "There is no such country, what are you?" And when he continued to maintain his nationality as a Yugoslav, he was bashed. The man who bashed him, no action was taken against him except at the insistence of members of our committee. The police finally investigated it, and the man was brought to trial. There are other examples of intimidation and bashing. We have examples, for example, in a meat factory in Footscray where lumps of glass were being put in the fleece by Croatian workers there because the people down the end of the production line who were handling these fleeces were Serbs. Now, this isn't existent. This isn't proof, of course, of the existence of the Ustaše. It is proof of the existence of very high feeling among Croatians against people whom they regard as their enemies.
The most conclusive proof of the existence of a terrorist organisation in Australia is a copy of a pamphlet found by police in a Melbourne house.
There are no details given in this pamphlet of where it's published or when it was published. It was in the possession of a man who was also carrying explosives. And in fact, this book talks about the setting up of groups called troikas. Troikas are in fact groups of 3 men whose job it is to terrorise the enemies of Croatia. And they see themselves as members of the Ustaše. This is only a photocopy of the book. But Kletvar's written in Serbo-Croat. We have parts of it translated. You find things in Kletvar which, for example, the setting up of a troika, one of whom is a troika is a trio, one of whom is an explosives expert, one of whom is an intelligence expert, the other of whom is a leader. These men they are told in the pamphlet they must not confront the enemy openly. They must work within the organisations of the country in which they live. They must terrorise the migrants who refuse to subscribe to the ideals of Croatian independence. And in fact, it says that they must infiltrate the secret police of the countries in which they work and even join the Communist Party of that country. They must never reveal themselves openly. They must be conversant completely with guerrilla warfare. It's very much the idea of swimming in the sea of the people, never confronting the enemy openly, never fighting when they're in a position of weakness. And the three men are bound together by a vow, which means that if the vow is broken, they must be killed. And if any man is ever captured, he must be replaced, and the oath of silence then falls on them. We believe that one of the men who's recently been arrested is in fact a member of a troika. And I think this is a good indication of the existence of organised terrorism in Victoria. There are groups of 1, 2, 3, 4 troikas come together to join up into a Borbeni row or Roj, which in fact is a larger group, a small combat group, and 3 of these join together to make a larger group. In other words, there's a hierarchy going towards the top, where these groups come together, if necessary, to form a battalion of men under the command of a satnik, who was a captain. Now, various members of Croatian community in Australia are referred to by that title. They're referred to by the title of satnik, and a satnik was a special rank, especially created during the Pavelić regime in the 40s, in the Ustaše army. A satnik is not just a captain; he's a captain in the Ustaše. Now, these satniks rule over the hierarchy, which breaks down to its smallest unit, which is a troika. And the troika is the group that is supposed to be invisible. It disappears swims in the sea of the people, if you like, and its job is to terrorise and to murder those people who are against the ideals of Croatia.